Hey guys, tonight we begin with a truth that will completely change how you think about the Middle Ages. What if I told you that medieval people had bathroom hygiene practices that were actually more sophisticated and environmentally sustainable than what 90% of Americans use today? That archaeological evidence shows medieval toilet solutions were cleaner, cheaper and better for your health than the processed paper we've been convinced we need. The reality is going to shock you. So before we dive into this fascinating discovery together, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button if you're ready to have your assumptions about medieval life completely transformed. And I'm curious, have you ever wondered what people did before toilet paper was invented? Drop a comment with your guess, because what you're about to learn might be completely different from what you're imagining. Now, let's get comfortable and discover why medieval people might have been doing bathroom hygiene better than we are today. Let me tell you about life in a typical medieval household around 1350. In these times, people didn't have the luxury of running to a store to buy mass-produced toilet paper. Instead, they developed ingenious solutions using materials that were not only effective but also completely sustainable, and often healthier than modern alternatives. The most common medieval toilet paper wasn't paper at all, it was what historians call the gentle cloth system. Families would keep collections of soft linen rags, usually made from worn-out clothing or bedding that had reached the end of its useful life as fabric. These weren't random scraps thrown together, they were carefully prepared, cleaned, and maintained as essential household items. Archaeological excavations at medieval sites across Europe have uncovered evidence of these cloth systems. At the 14th century site of Warham Percy in Yorkshire, England, archaeologists found evidence of dedicated washing areas near privy sites, suggesting sophisticated hygiene practices that went far beyond our stereotypes of medieval cleanliness. But the real genius of medieval toilet hygiene becomes clear when you understand their cleaning and maintenance systems. These cloth pieces weren't used once and thrown away like modern toilet paper. Instead, they were washed in boiling water with wood ash soap, a process that modern microbiologists recognize as highly effective at killing bacteria and maintaining sanitation. The wood ash soap used in medieval times was actually a powerful antibacterial agent. Wood ash contains potassium hydroxide, which creates a highly alkaline environment that destroys harmful microorganisms. This wasn't folk wisdom, it was effective chemistry that worked better than many modern cleaning products. What makes this even more remarkable is the sustainability aspect. A medieval family could maintain their entire bathroom hygiene system using materials they already had, producing zero waste and creating no environmental impact. Compare this to modern toilet paper production, which according to the Natural Resources Defense Council, requires 27,000 trees to be cut down every single day just to meet American demand. The wealthy had even more sophisticated options. Historical records from medieval monasteries and noble households describe the use of what they called sweet waters, solutions of herbs and wine used for personal cleaning. These weren't luxury indulgences, but practical hygiene solutions that modern analysis shows had genuine antimicrobial properties. Medieval people also understood something we've forgotten about bathroom design and hygiene. Their privy systems were often built with remarkable engineering sophistication. The famous medieval garderobe wasn't just a simple toilet, it was a carefully designed waste management system that used gravity, airflow, and sometimes running water to maintain sanitation. At Warwick Castle, which still preserves its medieval garderobes, you can see how these facilities were positioned to take advantage of natural ventilation and waste disposal. The engineering principles used in these medieval bathrooms were so sound that they influenced toilet design well into the 19th century. But here's where the medieval approach becomes especially relevant to modern concerns about health and environment. Medieval toilet hygiene was completely natural produced no chemical waste, created no plastic pollution, and cost virtually nothing to maintain. Yet it provided effective sanitation that kept communities healthy for centuries. The transition away from these sustainable practices began during the Industrial Revolution, when mass production made disposable products seem more convenient than reusable ones. In 1857, Joseph Gaetti created the first commercial toilet paper in America, marketing it as a luxury item for the wealthy. But this advancement came with hidden costs that medieval people never had to worry about. Modern toilet paper production involves chlorine bleaching, chemical softening agents, and synthetic fragrances that can cause skin irritation and environmental pollution. The manufacturing process requires enormous amounts of water and energy, and the final product creates waste that persists in landfills and sewage systems. Meanwhile, medieval cloth systems were infinitely reusable, required no industrial processing, and actually became softer and more effective with use and washing. They were the ultimate in sustainable technology, simple, effective, and completely renewable. Some modern families are rediscovering the wisdom of medieval hygiene practices. The family cloth movement, popular among zero-waste advocates, is essentially a return to medieval toilet hygiene methods. Families who make this switch often report cost savings of hundreds of dollars per year, reduced skin irritation, and the satisfaction of eliminating a major source of household waste. The lesson from medieval toilet hygiene isn't that we should abandon all modern conveniences, but that sometimes older solutions were actually superior to what replaced them. Medieval people solved basic human needs using principles that were sustainable, economical, and effective, qualities that our modern solutions often lack. As you think about your own daily routines, consider this. Medieval families achieved effective hygiene using materials they could make, maintain, and reuse indefinitely, with zero environmental impact and minimal cost. They created systems that worked in harmony with natural cycles rather than fighting against them. What if the path to better living isn't always about adopting the newest technology, but sometimes about rediscovering the wisdom of people who solved life's basic challenges using simple, sustainable, and remarkably effective methods? Speaking of remarkable medieval solutions, imagine having a communication system that could send complex messages across 100 miles faster than a horse could travel. No electricity, no satellites, just ingenious medieval engineering that connected entire kingdoms in ways that might surprise you. Speaking of remarkable medieval solutions, imagine having a communication system that could send complex messages across 100 miles faster than a horse could travel. No electricity, no satellites, just ingenious medieval engineering that connected entire kingdoms in ways that might surprise you. Here's something that will challenge everything you think you know about medieval communication. In 1326, important news could travel from London to Edinburgh, over 400 miles, in less than one day, using a network of signal fires, bells, and horn systems that was more reliable than many modern communication networks during emergencies. Medieval people had created what historians now recognize as Europe's first long-distance communication network, and it was so sophisticated that it puts our fragile modern systems to shame. To understand how remarkable this was, let's explore the daily life of a medieval signal keeper, not a fictional character, but the type of person whose job was absolutely crucial to medieval society. These were skilled professionals, often appointed by local lords or church authorities, who maintained communication links that held kingdoms together. The backbone of medieval long-distance communication was the bell system operated by the monasteries across Europe. This wasn't random bell ringing. It was a sophisticated code system that could transmit complex information across vast distances with remarkable accuracy. Monastic communities developed standardized bell codes that could communicate everything from religious observances to military threats. A specific sequence of bells could indicate harvest festival, armed raiders approaching from the west, or safe passage for travelers. These codes were so standardized that a monk traveling from France to Germany could understand the bell signals at any monastery along his route. The Cluny Monastery network, which connected over 1,000 religious houses across medieval Europe, maintained one of the most sophisticated communication systems of the medieval world. Historical records from the Cluny archives show that important information could travel from monastery to monastery across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours using coordinated bell signals. But the bell system was just one part of a larger medieval communication network. Signal fires, maintained on hilltops and castle towers, could relay visual messages across even greater distances during clear weather. The remains of these signal fire stations can still be seen across the British countryside, positioned at precisely calculated intervals to maximize visibility. Medieval military engineers understood principles of line-of-sight communication that modern military strategists still use today. Signal fire stations were positioned so that each could see at least two others, creating redundant communication paths that ensured messages could get through even if one or two stations were compromised. Historical records from medieval England show that during times of Scottish border raids, warning signals could travel from the Scottish borders to London in under 12 hours using the beacon fire system. This was faster than any horseback messenger could cover the same distance, and the system worked in all weather conditions that allowed visibility. The horn and trumpet systems used for shorter distance communication were equally sophisticated. Medieval communities developed standardized horn calls that could communicate specific information across distances of up to 10 miles. Different horn combinations indicated different types of messages, military threats, requests for assistance, all clear signals, or calls for community gatherings. Archaeological evidence from medieval castle sites shows that horn stations were positioned at regular intervals along major travel routes, creating communication corridors that allowed information to move rapidly across the landscape. These weren't random or improvised systems, they were carefully planned infrastructure that required ongoing maintenance and skilled operators. The efficiency of medieval communication systems becomes even more impressive when you consider that they operated without any external power source, required no complex technology, and were maintained by local communities using entirely renewable resources. A medieval signal fire required only wood, which was locally available and completely renewable. Bell systems used bronze bells that lasted for centuries with minimal maintenance. Medieval people also developed sophisticated methods for night communication using controlled light signals. Lantern codes, similar to the bell codes, could transmit information across shorter distances during darkness. These systems were particularly important for castle defense and urban security, allowing communities to coordinate responses to threats even when visibility was limited. The decline of these medieval communication systems reveals an important lesson about technological progress. When faster methods like mounted messengers and eventually written postal systems became available, communities gradually abandoned the signal networks that had served them for centuries. But in doing so, they lost something valuable: the ability to communicate instantly across long distances without depending on complex infrastructure. Modern emergency management agencies are rediscovering the value of these simple, robust communication methods. During natural disasters, when power grids fail and cellular networks become overloaded, communities sometimes find themselves cut off from communication entirely. Meanwhile, medieval communities had backup communication systems that worked independently of any infrastructure that could be disrupted. The medieval approach to communication teaches us something important about resilience and community self-reliance. These systems worked because they were maintained by local people who understood their importance and had the skills to operate them. They didn't depend on distant corporations, complex supply chains, or technologies that could become obsolete. Today, when our communication systems are increasingly centralized and vulnerable to disruption, there's wisdom in remembering how medieval communities created robust, reliable communication networks using simple technologies and community cooperation. The next time your internet goes down or your cell phone loses signal, remember the medieval signal keepers who could send messages across hundreds of miles using nothing but bells, fires, and horns, and consider whether our modern communication systems are really as advanced as we think they are. Now, let me tell you about a medieval kitchen tool that was far more than just a cooking implement. It was the foundation of medieval medicine, capable of creating treatments that saved lives and maintained health in ways that might revolutionize how we think about natural healing. Now let me tell you about a medieval kitchen tool that was far more than just a cooking implement. It was the foundation of medieval medicine, capable of creating treatments that saved lives and maintained health in ways that might revolutionize how we think about natural healing. Every medieval household, from the poorest peasant cottage to the richest noble manor, contained a tool that served as pharmacy, laboratory, and medical clinic all in one. This simple stone bowl with its wooden pestle was the mortar and pestle, and it represented one of the most important pieces of medical technology in human history. What makes this story so compelling is that you probably have this exact same technology sitting in your kitchen right now, but you have no idea how powerful it really is, or how it could transform your approach to health and wellness. In medieval times, the mortar and pestle wasn't just used for grinding spices for cooking. It was the primary tool for creating medicines, and the women who operated them were the healthcare providers for their entire communities. These weren't simple folk remedies. They were sophisticated pharmaceutical preparations based on centuries of accumulated knowledge about the healing properties of plants and herbs. Medieval medical texts, such as the famous Circa Instans, written around 1150, contain detailed instructions for using mortar and pestle techniques to create medicines for everything from digestive problems to wound healing. These texts reveal that medieval medicine makers understood precise grinding techniques, proper mixing ratios, and the importance of timing in pharmaceutical preparation. The mechanical action of the mortar and pestle doesn't just mix ingredients. It breaks down cell walls in plants, releasing active compounds that wouldn't be available through other preparation methods. Modern pharmaceutical companies use industrial versions of this same principle in their manufacturing processes, but medieval healers achieved similar results using simple stone tools and skilled techniques. Archaeological evidence from medieval sites shows that different households often specialized in grinding different types of medicines. Some focused on digestive remedies using herbs like fennel and ginger. Others created wound treatments using plants like comfrey and calendula. This specialization created informal networks of medical knowledge that ensured communities had access to a wide range of effective treatments. The sophistication of medieval pharmaceutical knowledge becomes clear when you examine surviving recipe collections from institutions like medieval monasteries and noble households. These recipes include precise measurements, specific grinding techniques, and detailed instructions for storage and application that demonstrate scientific understanding of how to preserve and maximize the effectiveness of plant-based medicines. Medieval mortar and pestle preparations often combined multiple herbs in ways that modern research has shown to be scientifically sound. For example, medieval texts frequently combine anti-inflammatory herbs like willow bark with digestive aids like ginger, combinations that enhance the effectiveness of both components while reducing potential side effects. The quality of medieval mortars and pestles was itself a form of advanced technology. These tools were carved from specific types of stone chosen for their hardness, non-porosity, and resistance to absorbing flavors or odors. The best medieval mortars were made from marble or granite, materials that provided the perfect grinding surface for pharmaceutical work. Medieval physicians understood something that modern medicine is rediscovering, that the mechanical processing of herbs can be as important as the herbs themselves. The grinding action releases volatile oils, breaks down tough plant fibers, and creates uniform particle sizes that improve absorption and effectiveness of the final medicine. Monastic communities were particularly advanced in their use of mortar and pestle pharmacy. Monasteries often maintained extensive herb gardens specifically for medicinal use, and monks developed sophisticated techniques for drying, storing, and preparing plant medicines. The medical knowledge preserved in monastic libraries represents one of the most important pharmaceutical traditions in human history. The decline of mortar and pestle medicine began during the Renaissance, when formal medical training became dominated by urban physicians who favored imported drugs over local plant medicines. This shift away from community-based, plant-focused healthcare represented a significant loss of medical knowledge that had been developed and refined over centuries. Modern research is validating many medieval pharmaceutical techniques. Studies of traditional plant medicines have identified active compounds that form the basis of contemporary drugs. Aspirin derives from willow bark, digitalis from foxglove, and countless other modern medications have their origins in plants that medieval healers prepared using mortar and pestle techniques. The environmental sustainability of medieval pharmaceutical practices offers important lessons for modern medicine. Medieval healers used locally grown herbs that required no industrial processing, created no chemical waste, and worked in harmony with local ecosystems. Their pharmaceutical practices were completely renewable and environmentally neutral. Some modern healthcare practitioners are rediscovering the value of traditional mortar and pestle pharmacy. Herbalists and integrative medicine practitioners use these ancient tools to create customized preparations that can't be replicated through industrial manufacturing. They are finding that hand-ground herbs often retain qualities that are lost in machine processing. The mortar and pestle also represents a different approach to healthcare, one that emphasizes prevention, natural healing, and community knowledge, rather than centralized medical institutions and synthetic drugs. Medieval people understood that maintaining health was a daily practice that involved diet, herbs, and lifestyle choices, rather than just treating diseases after they occurred. Today, when we're dealing with rising healthcare costs, drug-resistant bacteria, and side effects from synthetic medications, there's wisdom in remembering how medieval communities maintained health using simple tools, local resources, and accumulated knowledge about natural healing. The mortar and pestle sitting in your kitchen connects you to this tradition of natural health care. It represents the possibility of taking more control over your own health and wellness, using time-tested methods that have sustained human health for millennia. As you consider your own approach to health and medicine, think about the medieval understanding that the best pharmacy might be in your garden, and the best pharmaceutical tools might be the simple ones that put you in direct control of your own healing. But medieval people didn't just revolutionize medicine and communication, they also solved one of the most basic human needs in ways that modern science shows were actually superior to what we do today. Let me tell you about how medieval people achieved better, more natural sleep than most Americans get today. But medieval people didn't just revolutionize medicine and communication, they also solved one of the most basic human needs in ways that modern science shows were actually superior to what we do today. Let me tell you about how your medieval people achieved better, more natural sleep than most Americans get today. Here's a fact that will fundamentally change how you think about sleep. Medieval people sleeping on what we would consider primitive and uncomfortable beds actually got deeper, more restorative sleep than the majority of modern Americans who have access to memory foam mattresses, climate control, and every sleep technology imaginable. The secret lies in something that medieval people understood intuitively, but that modern sleep science is only now rediscovering: the importance of sleeping in harmony with natural rhythms rather than fighting against them. A typical medieval bed was built on a simple but ingenious system. Wooden bed frames were strung with rope in a tight crosshatch pattern, creating a flexible sleeping surface that could be adjusted for firmness by tightening or loosening the ropes. On top of this rope foundation, medieval people placed mattresses filled with straw, feathers, or wool, depending on their economic status. This rope bed system might seem primitive, but it solved several problems that modern mattresses actually create. The rope foundation provided support that moved naturally with the body, allowing for the micro-movements that modern sleep researchers have found to be essential for deep sleep. Unlike modern mattresses that create pressure points and restrict movement, rope beds adapted to the sleeper's body and sleeping position. Medieval people also had a completely different understanding of sleep timing, that modern chronobiology has proven to be more aligned with human biology than our current sleep patterns. Historical records from across medieval Europe describe what scholars call first sleep and second sleep, a natural pattern where people would sleep for several hours, wake for a period of quiet activity, then return to sleep until dawn. This wasn't insomnia or sleep disruption, it was the natural human sleep pattern that our ancestors followed for thousands of years. During the quiet, wakeful period between first and second sleep, medieval people would engage in prayer, meditation, quiet conversation, or gentle household tasks. Historical documents describe this time as peaceful and contemplative, not restless or anxious. Roger Ekirk, a historian at Virginia Tech, spent years researching historical sleep patterns and found over 2,000 references to this two-phase sleep pattern in historical documents, literature, and legal records from medieval and early modern Europe. His research suggests that the 8-hour consolidated sleep period we consider normal today is actually a recent invention that may not match our biological needs. Medieval sleep environments were also naturally optimized for deep rest in ways that modern bedrooms often aren't. Medieval homes had no artificial lighting after sunset, so people's circadian rhythms followed natural light cycles. Their sleeping areas were cool, dark, and quiet, conditions that modern sleep research has identified as ideal for restorative sleep. The absence of artificial light meant that medieval people's melatonin production followed natural patterns. Modern research shows that even small amounts of artificial light can suppress melatonin production and disrupt sleep quality, explaining why many people with access to comfortable beds and quiet bedrooms still struggle with sleep issues. Medieval people also practiced what we'd now call excellent sleep hygiene, without knowing the scientific reasons behind it. Their bedtime routines naturally prepared their bodies and minds for sleep. As daylight faded, activities became quieter and more contemplative. Evening prayers, family conversations, and gentle household tasks created a natural transition from the activity of the day to the rest of the night. The bedroom environment in medieval homes was used exclusively for sleep and intimacy. There were no televisions, computers, or other stimulating activities in sleeping areas. This created what modern sleep specialists call bedroom sanctuary, a space that the brain associates exclusively with rest and relaxation. Medieval bed maintenance also contributed to better sleep quality. Rope beds required regular adjustment and maintenance, which meant that sleeping surfaces remained supportive and comfortable. Mattress materials were regularly refreshed, straw was replaced, feathers were fluffed, and wool was cleaned and redistributed. This ongoing care ensured that beds remained comfortable and hygienic. The social aspects of medieval sleep also supported better rest. Extended families often shared sleeping spaces, which created feelings of security and community that reduced anxiety and promoted relaxation. While privacy was limited, the presence of trusted family members provided comfort and protection that helped people feel safe enough to sleep deeply. Medieval people understood the connection between physical comfort and sleep quality, but they achieved it through natural materials and methods rather than complex technology. Wool-filled mattresses provided excellent temperature regulation, naturally wicking away moisture while providing insulation. Feather pillows offered support that adjusted to individual head and neck shapes. Linen sheets were soft, breathable, and became more comfortable with use and washing. The decline of these natural sleep practices began with industrialization and urbanization. Gas lighting, then electric lighting, extended the day artificially and disrupted natural circadian rhythms. Factory schedules demanded that workers be alert during specific hours, making flexible sleep patterns impractical. The marketing of industrial mattresses convinced people that they needed increasingly complex and expensive sleeping surfaces to achieve rest. Modern sleep research is validating many medieval sleep practices. Studies show that cooler sleeping temperatures, complete darkness, and natural bedtime routines all contribute to better sleep quality. Research on segmented sleep suggests that the medieval pattern of first and second sleep may be more natural than the consolidated 8-hour sleep period we try to achieve today. Some people are rediscovering medieval sleep wisdom. The natural sleep movement encourages people to follow their body's natural rhythms rather than forcing artificial sleep schedules. People who adopt medieval-inspired sleep practices often report feeling more rested and experiencing less sleep anxiety. The lesson from medieval sleep practices isn't that we should abandon all modern comforts, but that we might achieve better rest by working with our natural biology rather than against it. Medieval people created sleep environments and routines that supported deep, restorative rest using simple natural methods that anyone can adapt to modern life. As you prepare for sleep tonight, consider the medieval understanding that good rest comes not from complex technology, but from creating conditions that support your body's natural sleep rhythms. Darkness, coolness, quiet, and routines that gently transition you from the activities of the day to the restoration of the night. And if medieval people mastered sleep so completely using simple natural methods, what other aspects of daily life did they approach with wisdom that we might benefit from rediscovering? Let me tell you about how ordinary medieval families built lasting wealth using a simple tool that created more prosperity than gold mines. And if medieval people mastered sleep so completely using simple natural methods, what other aspects of daily life did they approach with wisdom that we might benefit from rediscovering? Let me tell you about how ordinary medieval families built lasting wealth using a simple tool that created more prosperity than gold mines. In medieval Europe, there was one tool that could transform a poor family into a wealthy one within a single generation. It wasn't a weapon for conquest, it wasn't a tool for mining precious metals, and it wasn't a device for trade or commerce. It was something much simpler and more powerful, the loom. Textile production was the foundation of medieval prosperity, and every family that owned a loom owned a wealth-generating machine that could create financial security for generations. Understanding how this worked reveals principles about wealth creation that remain relevant today. The power of the medieval loom lay in its ability to transform raw materials worth very little into finished products worth many times more. A pound of raw wool that might cost a few pence could be woven into cloth worth several shillings, a markup that would make modern retailers envious. But the real genius of the medieval textile system was that it put this wealth-generating capability directly into the hands of ordinary families. Medieval textile production was organized around what historians call the putting out system, where textile merchants would provide raw materials to families who would process them in their homes using their own equipment. This system allowed families to earn income while maintaining their agricultural work and household responsibilities. The economic records that survive from medieval towns and cities show just how profitable textile work could be. In 14th century England, a skilled weaver could earn as much in a day as an agricultural labourer earned in a week. Families that owned their own looms and could purchase raw materials directly could earn even more by controlling the entire production process. The guild system that developed around textile production provided quality control, training, and market access that helped ordinary families build sustainable businesses. Textile guilds maintained standards that ensured their products commanded premium prices, provided apprenticeship programs that passed skills to the next generation, and created networks that connected producers with markets across Europe. Medieval textile production was remarkably sophisticated in its organization and technology. Different regions specialized in different types of cloth, creating trade networks that connected rural producers with urban markets and international commerce. English wool, Flemish finishing techniques, and Italian dyeing methods combined to create products that were traded from London to Constantinople. The technical skills required for medieval textile production were considerable, and families that mastered these skills possessed valuable human capital that couldn't be easily replicated or replaced. Skilled weavers understood fibre properties, dyeing techniques, pattern creation, and finishing methods that required years to learn and decades to perfect. The loom itself was a sophisticated piece of technology that represented a significant family investment. A good loom could last for generations with proper maintenance, making it both a production tool and a valuable family asset that could be passed down to children and grandchildren. Families often owned multiple looms of different types for producing different kinds of cloth. Medieval textile workers also understood the importance of controlling their supply chains and customer relationships. Successful families would establish relationships with wool producers, dye suppliers, and cloth merchants that allowed them to maximize their profits and ensure steady work. Some families eventually became textile merchants themselves, moving from production to trade. The environmental sustainability of medieval textile production offers lessons for modern manufacturing. Medieval textile work used renewable materials, created no chemical waste, and operated on entirely renewable energy. Human power and natural processes like fermentation for dyeing. The entire system was designed to work in harmony with natural cycles and local resources. The flexibility of medieval textile production also provided economic security that many modern workers lack. Families could increase or decrease their production based on market demand, family circumstances, and seasonal agricultural needs. During harvest time, they might focus on farming. During winter months, they could concentrate on textile work. Medieval textile production also created opportunities for women to contribute significantly to family income and accumulate personal wealth. Women's textile skills were highly valued, and many women operated their own textile businesses or inherited textile enterprises from their families. This provided a level of economic independence that was unusual in other areas of medieval life. The decline of home-based textile production during the Industrial Revolution represents one of history's most significant shifts in how wealth is created and distributed. The factory system concentrated textile production in large facilities owned by a few wealthy industrialists, transforming independent textile workers into wage labourers with no ownership of the means of production. While industrial production made cloth cheaper and more widely available, it also eliminated the pathway to wealth creation that had allowed thousands of ordinary families to build prosperity through skilled work and tool ownership. The loom went from being a wealth-generating asset owned by families to being industrial equipment owned by capitalists. Modern parallels to medieval textile production can be found in the growing maker economy and online marketplaces that allow skilled crafters to reach global markets. People who develop valuable skills and own their production tools can still create wealth in ways that echo the medieval textile system. The lesson from medieval textile production isn't necessarily that we should return to hand-weaving cloth, but that we should understand the principles that made it such an effective wealth-building system. Owning productive assets, developing valuable skills, controlling supply chains, and creating products that transform raw materials into finished goods that people value. Medieval families understood something about wealth creation that modern workers often miss. True financial security comes not from earning wages, but from owning assets that generate income. The loom was valuable not because it was expensive, but because it could create products worth more than the materials and time invested in making them. As you consider your own financial future, think about the medieval understanding that lasting wealth comes from developing skills and owning tools that allow you to create value, rather than just trading time for money. What skills do you have that could transform raw materials into valuable finished products? What tools could you own that would generate income rather than just consume it? The medieval loom teaches us that the path to prosperity isn't necessarily about finding the perfect job or making the right investments, but about developing the ability to create value through skilled work and ownership of productive assets, principles that remain as relevant today as they were 600 years ago. Now, while medieval families were building wealth through skilled craftsmanship, they were also solving the challenge of lighting their homes and workspaces in ways that were more beautiful, sustainable, and aligned with human health than anything we use today. Now, while medieval families were building wealth through skilled craftsmanship, they were also solving the challenge of lighting their homes and workspaces in ways that were more beautiful, sustainable, and aligned with human health than anything we use today. Here's something that might surprise you. Medieval people created lighting solutions that were more environmentally sustainable, better for human health, and more beautiful than the electric lighting that illuminates your home right now. And they did it using nothing but natural materials and techniques that had been perfected over centuries. The story of medieval lighting reveals how sometimes the simplest solutions are actually the most sophisticated, and how our rush toward technological complexity has caused us to lose sight of approaches that were superior in many important ways. Medieval lighting was based primarily on candles, but these weren't the simple decorative candles we know today. Medieval candle makers had developed sophisticated techniques for creating different types of candles for different purposes, using a variety of materials and methods that produced light sources perfectly suited to specific needs. The highest quality medieval candles were made from beeswax, which burns with a bright, clean flame and produces no smoke or unpleasant odours. Beeswax candles were expensive because they required significant amounts of beeswax, but they provided the best light for reading, fine work, and religious ceremonies. The Catholic Church specified that altar candles must be made from beeswax, recognizing their superior burning qualities. For everyday use, medieval families relied on tallow candles made from rendered animal fat, usually beef or mutton tallow. While tallow candles didn't burn as cleanly as beeswax, they were much more affordable and provided adequate light for most household activities. Skilled candle makers developed techniques for refining tallow and adding materials that improved burning qualities and reduced smoke. Medieval candle makers also created rushlights, which were made by soaking dried rushes in animal fat. Rushlights burned for a shorter time than candles but were extremely inexpensive to make and provided gentle light that was perfect for evening activities that didn't require bright illumination. Many families made their own rushlights using materials they could gather and prepare themselves. The sophistication of medieval lighting becomes apparent when you consider how different types of candles were used strategically throughout homes and communities. Bright beeswax candles were used in areas where detailed work was performed, while gentler tallow candles or rushlights provided ambient lighting for relaxation and social activities. This approach created lighting environments that naturally supported different activities and times of day. Medieval people understood something about light and health that modern science is just rediscovering: the importance of light color and intensity in regulating human circadian rhythms. Candlelight produces warm, low-intensity illumination that doesn't suppress melatonin production the way modern electric lighting does. This means that people who use candles for evening lighting naturally maintained healthy sleep cycles. The environmental sustainability of medieval lighting was remarkable. Beeswax came from local beehives that supported agriculture through pollination. Tallow was a byproduct of meat production that would otherwise have been waste. Rushlights used plants that grew naturally in wetlands and required no cultivation. The entire medieval lighting system operated on renewable resources with zero environmental impact. Medieval candle production also supported local economies in ways that modern lighting doesn't. Candle makers were skilled artisans who served local communities, and the materials they used came from local sources. This created economic relationships that supported rural agriculture, urban craftsmanship, and regional trade networks. The decline of candle-based lighting began with the development of gas lighting in the 19th century, followed by electric lighting in the 20th century. While these new technologies provided brighter, more convenient illumination, they also created new problems: dependence on complex infrastructure, environmental costs from energy production, and disruption of natural circadian rhythms. Modern research is validating many aspects of medieval lighting practices. Studies show that exposure to bright artificial light in the evening can disrupt sleep patterns, contribute to eye strain, and affect mood and mental health. The warm, gentle light produced by candles supports natural circadian rhythms and creates environments that promote relaxation and well-being. Some people are rediscovering the benefits of candle lighting for health and environmental reasons. The practice of using candles for evening lighting can improve sleep quality, reduce energy consumption, and create more peaceful, contemplative evening environments. Many families find that candlelight evenings become cherished times for conversation, reading, and relaxation. Medieval lighting also offers lessons about resilience and self-sufficiency. Candles can be made from locally available materials, require no external infrastructure, and provide reliable light during power outages or emergencies. Communities that maintain candle-making skills have lighting solutions that can't be disrupted by infrastructure failures. The aesthetic qualities of candlelight also provided benefits that electric lighting often lacks. The gentle, flickering light of candles creates warm, intimate environments that support social connection and relaxation. The ritual aspects of lighting and extinguishing candles mark transitions between different parts of the day and different types of activities. Medieval people also developed sophisticated techniques for managing candlelight safely and efficiently. Candlesticks, lanterns, and reflective surfaces were used to direct and amplify light where it was needed. Candle snuffers and trimmers maintained optimal burning conditions. These accessories turned candle use into a skill that maximized both safety and effectiveness. The lesson from medieval lighting isn't that we should abandon electric lights entirely, but that we might benefit from incorporating more natural lighting rhythms into our daily lives. Using candles for evening lighting, reducing artificial light exposure before bedtime, and creating gentle transitions between day and night activities can improve both health and quality of life. Medieval lighting practices remind us that the best technologies aren't always the most complex ones. and that solutions developed over centuries of human experience often contain wisdom that rapid technological change can overlook. Sometimes the most advanced approach is also the most simple and natural. As you consider your own relationship with light and darkness, think about the medieval understanding that different types of light serve different purposes, and that living in harmony with natural light cycles supports both physical health and emotional well-being. But lighting was just one aspect of medieval life where simple solutions proved superior to complex alternatives. Next, let me tell you about how medieval people created storage and transportation systems that were so effective they literally connected 3 continents and enabled the first truly global marketplace. There's one medieval invention that's so fundamental to our modern world that you interact with its descendants every single day. Yet most people have no idea how revolutionary it was. This simple wooden container didn't just store goods, it created the first global economy, connected civilizations across continents, and established trade networks that lasted for centuries. We're talking about the barrel, and its impact on human civilization was so profound that it literally shaped the modern world. Without this humble wooden container, there would have been no age of exploration, no global trade networks, and no economic systems that connected Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas. The barrel represents one of humanity's most important technological innovations, and understanding how it worked reveals principles about logistics, engineering, and global commerce that remain relevant today. Medieval barrels weren't just simple storage containers, they were sophisticated pieces of engineering that solved multiple complex problems simultaneously. A well-made barrel was waterproof, incredibly strong, and could be easily moved by rolling, lifting, or loading onto carts and ships. Most importantly, barrels could preserve their contents for months or even years, enabling long-distance trade that would have been impossible with other storage methods. The construction of a medieval barrel required remarkable skill and precision. Coopers, the craftsmen who made barrels, had to select the right wood, shape each stave to precise curves, and assemble them with such accuracy that the finished barrel would hold liquids without any glue, nails, or modern sealants. The barrel held together purely through the precise geometry of its construction and the compression created by metal hoops. Different types of barrels were designed for different purposes, and medieval coopers developed specialized techniques for each application. Wine barrels were made from oak that had been carefully aged and seasoned to avoid imparting unwanted flavors. Beer barrels used different wood treatments to complement the brewing process. Barrels for shipping salt, grain, or other dry goods were constructed with different specifications for maximum durability and protection. The standardization of barrel sizes was one of the earliest examples of international commerce standards. Medieval trade required that merchants in London, Venice, and Constantinople could all understand what they were buying when they ordered a ton of wine or a hogshead of ale. These standardized measurements became the foundation for international trade agreements and commercial law. The economic impact of the barrel was revolutionary. Before barrels, long-distance trade was limited by storage and transportation challenges. Goods had to be consumed quickly or they would spoil. Heavy ceramic vessels were expensive and fragile. Leather containers were vulnerable to damage and contamination. Barrels solved all these problems while being relatively affordable to produce. Medieval monasteries were among the most sophisticated users of barrel technology. Monasteries often served as centers of technological innovation, and monks developed advanced techniques for using barrels to preserve food, store wine and beer, and manage supplies for large communities. The brewing and winemaking traditions that developed in medieval monasteries relied heavily on barrel technology for fermentation, aging, and storage. The role of barrels in medieval brewing and winemaking was particularly important because these beverages were often safer to drink than water in medieval cities. Beer and wine underwent fermentation processes that killed harmful bacteria, making them essential for public health. Barrels enabled the production, storage and distribution of these life-sustaining beverages on a scale that supported growing urban populations. Maritime trade depended absolutely on barrel technology. Ships could carry much larger quantities of goods when they were packed in barrels rather than other containers. Barrels could be stacked efficiently in ship holds, they were less likely to break during rough voyages, and they could be easily loaded and unloaded at ports. The barrel made possible the maritime trade networks that connected medieval Europe with Asia and Africa. The preservation capabilities of barrels enabled entirely new forms of economic activity. Seasonal goods could be stored and sold throughout the year. Regional specialties could be shipped to distant markets. Surplus production could be preserved rather than wasted. This created economic stability and prosperity that hadn't been possible with the earlier storage technologies. Medieval military logistics also depended heavily on barrels. Armies could carry preserved food and drink for extended campaigns. Siege warfare became more feasible when defenders could store months of supplies in barrels. Naval expeditions could venture farther from home ports when they could carry water and food in reliable containers. The environmental sustainability of barrel technology was remarkable. Barrels were made from renewable wood resources using traditional craftsmanship. When barrels wore out, they could be repaired, repurposed, or recycled into other wooden products. The entire barrel industry operated on sustainable principles that modern industries are trying to rediscover. The social impact of barrel technology extended far beyond commerce. Coopers were respected craftsmen who served essential roles in their communities. The guild system that developed around coopering maintained high standards and passed skills from generation to generation. Coopering provided good livelihoods for thousands of skilled workers across medieval Europe. Barrel technology also influenced architecture and urban planning. Medieval buildings were designed with spaces for barrel storage. Cellars and warehouses were constructed to accommodate the rolling and stacking of barrels. Streets and doorways were sized to allow barrel transportation. The barrel shaped the physical infrastructure of medieval cities. The decline of traditional barrel use began with industrialization and the development of alternative packaging technologies. Metal containers, glass bottles, and eventually plastic packaging replaced barrels for many applications. While modern packaging is often more convenient, it has also created environmental problems that barrel technology didn't have. Some industries still rely on traditional barrel technology because modern alternatives can't match the unique properties of wood aging. Wine and whiskey production continue to use wooden barrels because the interaction between wood and liquid creates flavors and chemical changes that can't be replicated with other materials. These industries maintain the traditional coopering skills that have been passed down for centuries. The lesson from medieval barrel technology is that sometimes the simplest solutions are also the most elegant and effective. Barrels solved complex problems using renewable materials, traditional craftsmanship, and ingenious design. They enabled global commerce while operating on completely sustainable principles. Modern logistics companies are rediscovering some principles of barrel design. The concept of standardized, stackable, reusable containers that can be efficiently transported remains fundamental to global commerce. Today's shipping containers are essentially modern versions of medieval barrels, adapted for contemporary transportation systems. The barrel also teaches us about the importance of seemingly mundane technologies in shaping human civilization. We often focus on dramatic innovations like weapons or vehicles, but it was humble storage containers that enabled the economic systems that transform medieval society. As you think about the objects that surround you in daily life, Consider how many of them serve functions that medieval barrels once performed: storing, preserving, and transporting the goods that sustain our lives. The barrel reminds us that civilization often depends more on practical solutions to everyday problems than on spectacular technological breakthroughs. The medieval barrel connected distant civilizations, preserved essential goods, and created the economic foundations for the modern world. It's a reminder that innovation doesn't always look impressive, but its impact can be revolutionary. Speaking of medieval innovations that changed the world in unexpected ways, wait until you discover what medieval people wore on their feet. Footwear so dangerous it literally changed how humans walk, yet it reveals fascinating insights into the relationship between fashion, status, and the lengths people will go to display their social position. Imagine shoes so ridiculously long that walking became a physical challenge, so impractical that stairs became dangerous, and so extreme that they actually altered the way entire populations moved through the world. Medieval people created footwear that was simultaneously the height of fashion and a genuine health hazard, and the social forces that drove these trends reveal timeless truths about human nature that are just as relevant today. The story of medieval shoes is really the story of how far humans will go to display status, power, and wealth, even when it literally cripples them. In 14th and 15th century Europe, the wealthy elite wore shoes called poulaines or cracots that featured pointed toes extending far beyond the actual foot. These weren't just slightly pointed shoes, we're talking about footwear with toes that could extend 12, 18, or even 24 inches beyond the wearer's actual toes. Some of the most extreme examples required the extended points to be stuffed with materials like moss or wool to maintain their shape. The longest poulaines were so impractical that walking normally became impossible. Wearers had to develop an entirely different gait, a shuffling, careful movement that prevented them from tripping over their own feet. Stairs became genuinely dangerous. Running was out of the question. These shoes literally disabled their wearers in the name of fashion. Archaeological evidence from medieval cemeteries has provided fascinating insights into how these extreme shoes affected the people who wore them. Excavations of high-status medieval burials have revealed skeletal remains showing specific patterns of wear and stress that indicate the long-term effects of wearing severely impractical footwear. The social rules governing poulain length were strictly regulated by sumptuary laws, legal codes that dictated what different social classes could wear. Common people were forbidden from wearing shoes with points longer than 6 inches. Merchants and minor nobility could wear points up to 12 inches. Only the highest nobility could wear the most extreme versions that extended 18 to 24 inches beyond the foot. These laws weren't just about fashion, they were about maintaining social hierarchy through visible displays of impracticality. The logic was simple. Only someone who didn't need to work with their hands or move quickly could afford to wear shoes that made normal movement impossible. Extreme poulains were a way of announcing, "I am so wealthy and powerful that I don't need to be practical." The manufacturing of extreme poulains required incredible skill from medieval cobblers. Creating shoes that extended so far beyond the foot while remaining structurally sound and wearable demanded sophisticated understanding of materials, construction, and engineering. The most expensive poulains were works of art as much as functional footwear. Different regions developed their own variations of pointed footwear. The Krakows that originated in Krakow, Poland became particularly famous for their extreme length. Italian versions often featured elaborate decorations and premium materials. French styles emphasized elegant curves and proportions. Each regional variation reflected local aesthetics and social customs. The decline of poulains came partly through religious opposition. church leaders condemned them as examples of vanity and worldly excess. Some religious authorities argue that the extreme points were not just impractical, but actually sinful, evidence of pride and concern with worldly appearance that distracted from spiritual matters. But medieval footwear wasn't just about extreme fashion statements. For working people, shoes were essential tools that needed to provide protection, durability, and functionality. Medieval craftsmen developed sophisticated techniques for creating footwear that could withstand the demands of different occupations and environments. Medieval pattens were wooden or metal overshoes worn over regular shoes to protect them from mud, water, and rough surfaces. These platforms raised the wearer several inches off the ground and could be removed when indoors. Archaeological finds show that patterns were extremely common and came in many different styles for different purposes. The construction of medieval shoes reveals remarkable sophistication in working with leather and other materials. Medieval cobblers understood how to treat and shape leather to create waterproof, durable, and comfortable footwear using only natural materials and hand tools. Their techniques for lasting, stitching, and finishing shoes were developed over centuries and represented accumulated knowledge about materials of science and construction. Medieval shoe archaeology has provided insights into daily life that other artifacts can't match. Shoes preserve information about walking patterns, wear habits, social status, and economic conditions. The analysis of medieval shoes found in excavations reveals details about nutrition, health, working conditions, and social mobility that help historians understand how ordinary people lived. The leatherworking industries that supported medieval shoe production were major economic sectors in medieval cities. Tanners, curriers, and cobblers formed powerful guilds that controlled quality, training, and market access. The production of a single pair of high-quality medieval shoes involved multiple specialists and could take weeks to complete. Environmental conditions in medieval cities created specific challenges for footwear that modern people rarely consider. Streets were unpaved, often muddy, and frequently contaminated with animal waste and other hazards. Medieval shoes needed to provide protection from these conditions while being durable enough to last for months or years of hard use. The social significance of shoes in medieval culture extended far beyond mere protection for the feet. Shoes were indicators of occupation, social class, regional origin, and personal wealth. A person's shoes could immediately communicate important information about their place in society to anyone who knew how to read the visual codes. Medieval apprenticeship systems for shoemaking were sophisticated training programs that took years to complete. Master cobblers passed down techniques that had been refined over generations, along with trade secrets about materials, tools, and finishing methods. The quality of medieval shoes produced by these trained craftsmen often exceeded what mass production methods can achieve today. The economic importance of shoes in medieval society is reflected in their frequent appearance in wills, inventories, and legal documents. Shoes were valuable enough to be inherited, stolen, and fought over in court. The investment in a good pair of shoes represented a significant portion of a working person's annual income. Regional variations in medieval shoe styles reflected local materials, climate conditions, and cultural preferences. Northern European shoes were designed for cold, wet conditions and emphasized warmth and waterproofing. Mediterranean styles prioritized ventilation and heat resistance. Each region developed footwear solutions adapted to local environmental challenges. The transition from medieval to Renaissance shoe styles reflected broader social and economic changes. As trade networks expanded and new materials became available, shoe designs became more varied and experimental. The extreme pointed styles gradually gave way to broader, more practical designs that reflected changing social values. Modern shoe manufacturing has largely abandoned many of the techniques that made medieval shoes durable and repairable. Medieval shoes were constructed to be resoled, repaired, and maintained for years of use. Contemporary shoes are often designed to be disposable, creating waste and ongoing expense that medieval people would have found wasteful and impractical. The lesson from medieval footwear is partly about the eternal tension between fashion and function, but is also about how social pressures can lead people to make choices that are actively harmful to their own well-being. The nobleman shuffling around in 18-inch poulaines was sacrificing his mobility and health to maintain his social status, a dynamic that remains recognizable in modern consumer culture. Think about your own relationship with fashion and status symbols. How often do you choose appearance over comfort or practicality? What modern equivalents of poulaines do we wear? Things that limit our capabilities or harm our health in the name of looking successful or fashionable. The medieval shoe reminds us that humans have always been willing to endure significant discomfort and impracticality in pursuit of social status, and that the pressure to display wealth and position through visible consumption is not a modern invention, but a fundamental aspect of human social behavior. Yet medieval footwear also shows us the remarkable ingenuity and skill that people applied to solving practical problems. When medieval craftsmen focused on function over fashion, they created shoes that were more durable, repairable, and well adapted to their environment than much of what we have today. As we continue exploring medieval innovations, consider how often the tension between practicality and status appears in human-designed objects, and how this tension reveals fundamental truths about what we value and why. But while medieval nobility was hobbling around in impractical footwear, ordinary people in medieval kitchens possessed something far more dangerous, tools that could stop a fully armoured knight in his tracks, yet served daily as humble implements for preparing family meals. Right now, sitting in your kitchen drawer, you probably have a tool that medieval people considered so dangerous that laws were passed to regulate who could carry them, where they could be worn, and how long they could be. This wasn't a specialized weapon designed for warfare. It was an everyday object that every family needed for survival, yet it was so effective in combat that it shaped medieval society's approach to personal defense and social control. I'm talking about the knife, and in medieval times there was no distinction between a kitchen tool and a weapon. Every knife was potentially lethal, and every person who owned one was essentially armed. The medieval knife, known as a seax, was the Swiss army knife of its era, a multi-purpose tool that served as eating utensil, cooking implement, work tool, and personal defense weapon all in one. Understanding how medieval people lived with these dual-purpose objects reveals fascinating insights into a world where the line between daily life and personal security was much thinner than it is today. Medieval knives were not the specialized kitchen tools we know today. A typical medieval knife was designed to handle every cutting task a person might encounter throughout their day. The same blade that chopped vegetables for dinner could skin a rabbit, cut leather for repairs, carve wood for household items, and, if necessary, defend against attackers. The construction of medieval knives represented some of the most advanced metallurgy of their time. Medieval blacksmiths understood techniques for creating blades that combined different types of steel to achieve optimal performance. The cutting edge might be made from hard, high-carbon steel that could hold a razor-sharp edge, while the spine of the blade was made from softer, more flexible steel that prevented the knife from breaking under stress. Archaeological excavations have revealed the remarkable sophistication of medieval knife-making techniques. Finds from sites like Jorvik, York, in England, show that medieval cutlers were producing knives with complex laminated construction, where multiple layers of different steels were forge-welded together to create blades with properties that modern metallurgists recognize as extremely advanced. The social significance of knives in medieval culture was profound. A person's knife was often their most valuable personal possession after their clothing. Knives were frequently mentioned in wills and inheritance documents, passed down through generations as family heirlooms. The quality and decoration of a person's knife communicated important information about their social status, occupation, and regional origin. Medieval dining customs were built around the assumption that every person would bring their own knife to meals. There were no table knives provided by hosts. Guests were expected to carry their own cutting implements. This meant that every medieval person, from peasant to noble, carried what was essentially a weapon everywhere they went. The legal status of knives in medieval society was complex and varied by region and social class. While everyone needed knives for daily tasks, there were strict regulations about blade length, carrying methods, and when knives could be drawn in public. The English Statute of Winchester in 1285 prohibited carrying knives with blades longer than a certain measurement within city limits. Medieval records show that knives were involved in a significant percentage of violent crimes, not because people were more violent than today, but because knives were the tools that everyone carried and knew how to use. Court records from medieval England indicate that knife-related injuries were common enough that specific legal procedures were developed for handling such cases. The training that medieval people received in knife use was primarily practical rather than martial. Children learned to handle knives safely as part of their basic education in daily living skills. By adulthood, most medieval people had developed knife skills that would impress modern martial artists. Not because they were warriors, but because competent knife use was essential for survival. Different occupations required specialized knife designs that reflected the specific needs of various trades. Butchers used heavy cleavers and boning knives. Leather workers had curved knives designed for cutting and shaping hides. Farmers carried sturdy knives that could handle both food preparation and agricultural tasks. Each profession developed distinctive knife styles that became markers of occupational identity. The relationship between medieval knives and social control was complex. While authorities were concerned about the potential for violence when everyone was armed, they also recognized that knives were essential tools that couldn't be banned without causing massive disruption to daily life. The solution was regulation rather than prohibition, laws that controlled how knives could be carried and used, rather than eliminating them entirely. Medieval women were as likely as men to carry and use knives, though their knives were often designed for specific domestic tasks. Archaeological finds include many knives with decorative handles and sheaths that appear to have been made specifically for women, suggesting that female knife ownership was normal and accepted in medieval society. The decline of universal knife carrying began in the late medieval period as specialized eating utensils became more common, and urban authorities gained greater control over personal weapons. The development of forks, spoons, and dedicated table knives gradually reduced the need for people to carry multi-purpose blades everywhere they went. Modern knife laws in many countries still reflect medieval concerns about the potential dangers of edged tools. Blade length restrictions, concealed carry regulations, and prohibitions on certain knife types in public spaces all have their origins in medieval attempts to balance the practical necessity of knives with concerns about public safety. The metallurgical techniques developed by medieval knife makers influenced the development of other edged tools and weapons. The same skills used to create effective kitchen knives were applied to making swords, agricultural tools, and specialized craft implements. Medieval cutlery represents some of the highest achievements in pre-industrial metallurgy. Contemporary knife enthusiasts and martial artists are rediscovering the sophistication of medieval knife designs. Modern reproductions of medieval seax knives are prized for their versatility and effectiveness. The balanced design that made these knives effective for both utility tasks and personal defense continues to influence modern knife design. The lesson from medieval knife culture is partly about the integration of practical tools and personal security in daily life, but it's also about how technology shapes social relationships. When everyone carries effective weapons as part of their daily toolkit, society must develop different approaches to conflict resolution and social control than when weapons are specialized and restricted. Think about your own relationship with tools and personal security. How would your daily life change if you routinely carried tools that could serve multiple purposes, including self-defense? What does it mean that we've largely separated our everyday implements from our security concerns? The medieval knife reminds us that the distinction between tools and weapons is often more about context and intention than about the objects themselves. The same blade that prepared a family's dinner could save their lives in an emergency, reflecting a worldview where survival skills and daily life skills were intimately connected. Medieval people understood something about preparedness and self-reliance that modern urban life has largely eliminated. They lived with the knowledge that they might need to defend themselves, provide their own food, and solve their own problems using the tools they carried and the skills they possessed. As you consider the tools in your own kitchen, think about the medieval understanding that the objects we use for daily tasks might also serve other purposes when circumstances require it, and that true security often comes not from specialized equipment, but from the knowledge and skills to use common tools effectively. This integration of practical utility and personal capability appears throughout medieval life, including in their approach to preserving and sharing knowledge. They created books so valuable that people would literally die to protect them. Yet these treasures of learning were built to last for centuries using techniques that put modern publishing to shame. Here's something that will completely change how you think about the value of knowledge. In 1424, a single illuminated manuscript cost more than a skilled craftsman could earn in 15 years of work. That's the equivalent of spending $750,000 on a single book today. Medieval books weren't just expensive, they were among the most valuable objects in existence, more precious than gold, more coveted than jewels, and so important that entire wars were fought over libraries. And the reason they were so valuable reveals something profound about how medieval people understood the power of preserved knowledge, something we've completely lost in our age of infinite digital information. Medieval books were handcrafted masterpieces that took months or even years to create. Each page was made from specially prepared animal skins called vellum, or parchment, which required the hides of entire flocks of sheep or herds of calves. A single large Bible might require the skins of 300 animals, making the raw materials alone extraordinarily expensive. The creation of a medieval manuscript involved teams of specialized craftsmen working in careful coordination. Scribes would copy the text letter by letter, a process that could take a full year for a complete Bible. Illuminators would add decorative initials, borders, and miniature paintings using pigments made from precious materials like ground gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and rare minerals imported from across the known world. The famous Book of Kells, created by Irish monks around 800 CE, contains pigments that came from the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and possibly even India. This single manuscript represents one of the most extensive international trade networks of its time, all in service of creating a book beautiful enough to honor God and preserve sacred knowledge. The binding of medieval books was itself a work of art requiring specialized craftsmen. Bookbinders used wooden boards covered with leather, often decorated with precious metals, ivory, carvings, and mobs. The most elaborate bindings were created by goldsmiths and jewelers rather than traditional bookbinders, resulting in covers that were themselves valuable works of art. Medieval libraries were not the quiet study spaces we know today. They were treasure vaults that required armed guards and elaborate security measures. Books were often chained to reading desks to prevent theft, not because medieval people were more dishonest than we are, but because a single book represented such enormous wealth that stealing one could set a person up for life. The security measures surrounding medieval books were extraordinary. At the Hereford Cathedral Library in England, which still preserves its medieval chained library, books were attached to iron chains that allowed them to be read but not removed from the building. The chains were long enough to allow the books to be opened and read at nearby desks, but short enough to prevent them from being carried away. Medieval monasteries became centres of book production, partly because they were among the few institutions with the resources and organisational capacity to undertake such massive projects. Creating an illuminated manuscript required not just skilled craftsmen, but also access to international trade networks for materials, significant financial resources to support workers for months or years, and the institutional stability to see long-term projects through to completion. The intellectual content of medieval books was as valuable as their physical construction. In an age when knowledge could only be preserved through hand copying, every book represented hundreds of hours of scholarly work. Scribes didn't just copy text mechanically, they were often scholars themselves who corrected errors, added commentary, and preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. The survival rate of medieval manuscripts reveals just how precious they were considered. Despite their enormous value and careful preservation, scholars estimate that less than 1% of medieval books have survived to the present day. Wars, fires, neglect, and deliberate destruction have eliminated vast libraries that once contained the accumulated knowledge of entire civilizations. The destruction of medieval libraries during the Protestant Reformation and other religious conflicts represents one of history's greatest losses of knowledge. When Henry VIII dissolved the English monasteries in the 1530s, thousands of irreplaceable manuscripts were destroyed, sold as scrap or used for mundane purposes like wrapping food. Scholars estimate that England lost over 90% of its medieval manuscripts during this period. Medieval book production techniques achieved levels of durability that modern publishing has never matched. Many medieval manuscripts that are 800 to 1,000 years old remain in excellent condition, with vibrant colours and readable text. The vellum pages and natural inks used in medieval books have proven far more stable over time than the wood, pulp, paper and chemical inks used in modern printing. The economics of medieval book production created interesting social dynamics around literacy and learning. Because books were so expensive, literacy was often a communal rather than individual activity. One person who could read might serve an entire community, reading aloud from valuable manuscripts that the community could afford to own collectively, but individuals could never purchase alone. Medieval universities developed innovative systems for sharing expensive books among students and faculty. The Picia system allowed scribes to rent sections of important texts, copy them, and return them so that others could access the same material. This was essentially a medieval version of course reserves, designed to maximize access to limited and expensive educational resources. The illuminated decorations in medieval manuscripts served purposes beyond mere beauty. The elaborate initial letters, margin decorations, and miniature paintings were memory aids that helped readers navigate and remember complex texts. Medieval scholars understood that visual elements could enhance comprehension and retention in ways that pure text could not. Different types of medieval books required different levels of investment and served different social functions. A simple prayer book for personal use might cost the equivalent of a few months' wages for a craftsman. A complete illuminated Bible for a cathedral might represent the accumulated wealth of an entire region. Legal documents and royal charters required elaborate decoration to demonstrate their authority and importance. The decline of hand-copied manuscripts began with Gutenberg's printing press around 1450, but the transition was gradual. For several decades, printed books competed with manuscripts, and many early printed books attempted to replicate the appearance of hand-copied texts. Wealthy patrons continued to commission illuminated manuscripts well into the Renaissance because they valued the prestige and beauty that only handcrafted books could provide. Modern book collectors are rediscovering the appeal of medieval manuscript techniques. Contemporary artists and craftsmen who create books using traditional vellum, hand-mixed inks, and illuminated decorations find that their work commands prices that reflect the time and skill required, often thousands of dollars for a single volume. The lesson from medieval books isn't just about the value of craftsmanship, but about fundamentally different approaches to knowledge and learning. Medieval people understood that information worth preserving was worth investing significant resources to preserve well. They created books that were designed to last for centuries and remain beautiful enough to inspire reverence for the knowledge they contained. In our digital age, when information is cheap and abundant, we might ask whether we've gained or lost something important in the transition from precious, permanent books to disposable digital content. Medieval books commanded respect partly because of their cost and rarity. When knowledge is free and infinite, do we value it appropriately? Think about your own relationship with books and information. When was the last time you held a book that felt truly precious? How does the physical form of information affect how seriously you take its content? What would change about our approach to learning if books were still rare and expensive treasures? The medieval manuscript reminds us that the preservation of knowledge has always required significant investment and institutional commitment. The beautiful books that survive from medieval times exist because entire communities were willing to dedicate enormous resources to creating and protecting them. But while medieval communities were creating beautiful books to preserve knowledge for eternity, they were also developing personal care routines that were far more sophisticated and effective than the chemical-laden products most of us use today. And their approach to hygiene and wellness might revolutionize how you think about taking care of yourself. Every morning you slather your skin with products containing dozens of synthetic chemicals, many of which your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as anything other than industrial compounds. You spend hundreds of dollars annually on skincare products that promise to solve problems that medieval people rarely experienced. Meanwhile, in 1380, ordinary people maintained healthier skin, stronger hair, and better overall hygiene using nothing but plants, minerals, and techniques that actually improved their health rather than merely masking problems. Here's what might shock you. Medieval people had lower rates of skin disease, better dental health, and more effective personal care routines than many modern people, and they achieved this using methods that cost almost nothing, and worked in harmony with human biology rather than against it. The medieval approach to personal hygiene was built on understanding principles that modern wellness experts are only now rediscovering. That the skin is a living ecosystem that requires balance rather than chemical bombardment, that prevention is more effective than treatment, and that the best personal care products are often the simplest ones. Medieval bathing practices were far more sophisticated than popular stereotypes suggest. Archaeological evidence from medieval sites across Europe reveals extensive bathing facilities, from simple wooden tubs in peasant cottages to elaborate bathhouses in medieval cities. The myth that medieval people never bathed is largely a Victorian invention, created to make the 19th century seem more civilized by comparison. Medieval bathhouses were community centres that served social, hygienic and therapeutic functions. Cities like London, Paris, and Nuremberg had dozens of public bathhouses where people could enjoy hot baths, steam treatments, and on various health services. These establishments were regulated by municipal authorities and operated according to strict hygiene standards that ensured clean water and sanitary conditions. The therapeutic baths used in medieval times incorporated herbs and minerals that modern research has validated as beneficial for skin health and overall wellness. Medieval people understood that different plants had different effects on the body and developed sophisticated formulations for treating specific conditions. Rosemary baths were used to improve circulation and treat joint pain. Modern research has confirmed that rosemary contains compounds that increase blood flow and have anti-inflammatory properties. Lavender baths were prescribed for anxiety and insomnia, effects that contemporary aromatherapy research has validated. Chamomile baths were used for skin irritation and wound healing, applications that modern dermatology recognizes as scientifically sound. Medieval people also developed effective dental hygiene practices using natural materials that were often superior to early modern alternatives. While they didn't have toothbrushes as we know them, they used chew sticks made from trees like willow, whose bark contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin, and has natural antibacterial properties. Medieval tooth powders were made from herbs like sage, mint, and fennel, combined with abrasive materials like crushed bone or pumice stone. These natural tooth cleaners were often more effective than the early commercial toothpastes of the 18th and 19th centuries, which frequently contained harmful ingredients like lead or mercury. The medieval understanding of the four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, led to personalised approaches to health and hygiene that modern medicine is beginning to appreciate. While the specific theory was incorrect, the principle of treating each person as an individual with unique needs and characteristics was actually quite advanced. Medieval physicians and herbalists developed detailed systems for matching treatments to individual constitutions, taking into account factors like age, temperament, season, and personal history. This individualized approach to wellness is now recognized as more effective than one-size-fits-all treatments that ignore personal differences. Medieval skincare was based on understanding that healthy skin requires balance between oil and moisture, protection from environmental damage, and support for natural healing processes. They achieved this balance using simple natural ingredients that modern dermatologists are rediscovering as effective alternatives to synthetic products. Rose water, made by distilling rose petals, was a common medieval skincare product that served as toner, moisturizer, and anti-inflammatory treatment. Modern research has confirmed that rose water contains antioxidants and compounds that reduce skin irritation and promote healing. Medieval people used it daily for maintaining healthy, clear skin. Honey was another cornerstone of medieval skincare, used both internally and externally for its healing properties. Medieval texts describe honey treatments for wounds, skin conditions, and general health maintenance. Contemporary research has validated honey's antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and wound healing properties, leading to its use in modern medical treatments. Medieval hair care was remarkably sophisticated, using natural ingredients that promoted healthy growth and maintained scalp health without the harsh chemicals found in modern shampoos. People used herbal rinses made from plants like nettle, rosemary, and birch bark to clean and condition their hair. The no-poo movement, popular among contemporary wellness enthusiasts, is essentially a return to medieval hair care principles. Medieval people understood that overwashing with harsh soaps could damage hair and scalp health, so they developed gentler cleaning methods using natural ingredients that supported the hair's natural oils and growth cycles. Medieval people also had effective methods for dealing with common hygiene challenges, like body odor, dental problems, and skin conditions. They used natural deodorants made from herbs and minerals, created effective mouthwashes from plants with antibacterial properties, and developed topical treatments for skin issues that worked with the body's natural healing processes. The decline of these natural hygiene practices began during the Industrial Revolution, when mass-produced synthetic products became available. Marketing campaigns convinced people that scientific products were superior to traditional methods, even when the traditional methods were actually more effective and less harmful. The modern personal care industry has created problems that medieval people rarely experienced by disrupting the natural balance of skin and hair with harsh chemicals, then selling additional products to address the problems created by the original products. This cycle of disruption and treatment is foreign to medieval approaches that focused on supporting natural health rather than replacing it. Contemporary dermatologists and wellness practitioners are rediscovering the effectiveness of medieval hygiene principles. The growing popularity of natural skincare, oil cleansing, and traditional herbal treatments reflects recognition that simpler approaches are often more beneficial than complex chemical formulations. The environmental impact of medieval hygiene practices was also far superior to modern alternatives. Medieval people used biodegradable, renewable ingredients that didn't pollute water sources or create persistent environmental contamination. Their entire approach to personal care operated within natural cycles without creating waste or harmful byproducts. Medieval communities developed hygiene practices that worked for their specific environments and lifestyles. People living in different climates, pursuing different occupations, and facing different health challenges developed customized approaches that addressed their particular needs using locally available resources. The social aspects of medieval hygiene also contributed to better outcomes. Bathhouses provided opportunities for social interaction, stress relief, and community support that contributed to overall wellness. The ritual aspects of bathing and personal care served psychological and spiritual functions that enhanced their physical benefits. Modern attempts to recreate medieval hygiene practices often focus only on the physical treatments, while ignoring the social and cultural context that made them effective. Medieval people understood that personal care was part of a larger system of community health, spiritual practice, and environmental harmony. The lesson from medieval hygiene isn't necessarily that we should abandon all modern products, but that we might benefit from understanding the principles that made traditional practices effective, supporting natural processes rather than disrupting them, using simple ingredients that work with the body rather than against it, and recognizing that personal care is part of overall wellness rather than just appearance maintenance. Think about your own personal care routine. How many products do you use that contain ingredients you can't pronounce? How often do you experience skin or hair problems that require additional products to treat? What would happen if you simplified your routine to focus on supporting your body's natural health rather than fighting against it? Medieval hygiene reminds us that effective personal care doesn't require expensive products or complex routines. Sometimes the most sophisticated approach is also the simplest one, and the best way to care for yourself is to work with your body's natural systems rather than trying to replace them with artificial alternatives. As we've seen throughout this exploration of medieval life, the theme of working with natural systems rather than against them appears consistently, and nowhere is this more evident than in how medieval people approached one of humanity's most fundamental needs: keeping track of time itself. You wake up to a digital alarm, check your phone for the exact time, and live your entire day enslaved to precise minute-by-minute scheduling that would have seemed absolutely insane to our medieval ancestors. Yet those same ancestors created timekeeping systems that were more accurate than your smartphone for the things that actually mattered, more reliable than atomic clocks for practical daily use, and more beautiful than any luxury watch ever made. They achieved this using nothing but shadows, water, stars, and an understanding of natural rhythms that we've completely lost in our obsession with artificial precision. Medieval timekeeping wasn't about counting every second, it was about living in harmony with natural cycles that governed everything from agriculture to prayer, from commerce to community life. And their approach to time might be exactly what our chronically stressed, overscheduled modern world desperately needs. Medieval people didn't live by the tyranny of exact hours that dominates modern life. Instead, they used what historians call temporal hours, a system where the day was divided into 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness, regardless of the season. This meant that summer hours were longer than winter hours, creating a flexible relationship with time that adapted to natural rhythms rather than fighting against them. The sundial was the foundation of medieval timekeeping, but these weren't the simple garden decorations we know today. Medieval sundials were sophisticated scientific instruments that could indicate not just time, but also seasons, holy days, and astronomical events. Master craftsmen created portable sundials that could be adjusted for different latitudes, allowing travelers to keep accurate time wherever their journeys took them. The most impressive medieval sundials were architectural marvels integrated into church buildings and public spaces. The famous sundial at Chartres Cathedral, created in the 13th century, is a masterpiece of mathematical precision that still functions perfectly today. Its design incorporates complex calculations that account for the Earth's orbital variations and provide accurate timekeeping throughout the year. Medieval monasteries developed the most sophisticated timekeeping systems of their era because religious life required precise scheduling of prayers and services. Monks created elaborate combinations of sundials, water clocks, candle clocks, and astronomical observations that allowed them to maintain accurate schedules regardless of weather or season. Water clocks, known as clepsydrae, were medieval marvels of engineering that could keep time during cloudy days and throughout the night when sundials were useless. These devices used the steady flow of water through carefully calibrated openings to measure time intervals. The most sophisticated water clocks included mechanisms that could ring bells, move figures, or perform other automatic functions at specific times. The water clock at the Al-Jazari Mosque, built by the famous medieval engineer Al-Jazari in the 12th century, was described by contemporary observers as one of the wonders of the world. This elaborate timepiece featured automated figures that moved to indicate hours, mechanical birds that sang at specific times, and complex gearing systems that demonstrated the advanced state of medieval mechanical knowledge. Medieval people also mastered the art of astronomical timekeeping, using the movements of stars and planets to track longer time periods and coordinate calendars. Medieval astronomers created astrolabes, portable instruments that could determine time, direction, and astronomical positions with remarkable accuracy. The astrolabe was essentially a medieval computer, capable of solving complex mathematical problems related to time and navigation and astronomy. Master craftsmen like those working in Toledo, Spain and Oxford, England, created astrolabes so precise that they remain the standard astronomical instruments for centuries. Some medieval astrolabes were accurate enough to be used for navigation across the Mediterranean and Atlantic. Candle clocks provided another ingenious solution to medieval timekeeping challenges. These weren't simple candles, but carefully crafted time-measuring devices with markings that indicated specific time intervals as the candle burned. Different types of candles were designed for different time periods. Some burned for exactly 1 hour, others for specific fractions of hours needed for religious observances. The Japanese still preserve the tradition of medieval-style incense clocks, which work on the same principle as European candle clocks. These devices can measure time periods with surprising accuracy, often within minutes over periods of several hours. Modern testing has shown that well-made candle clocks can be more reliable than early mechanical timepieces. Medieval bell systems created community-wide timekeeping networks that coordinated activities across entire regions. Church bells didn't just call people to prayer, they announced work schedules, market hours, curfews, and community events. The pattern of bell ringing communicated specific information about time and activities to everyone within hearing range. The mechanical clocks that began appearing in medieval cathedrals and town halls during the 13th and 14th centuries represented some of the most complex machines ever built up to that time. These early mechanical clocks were primarily public timepieces designed to coordinate community activities rather than provide personal timekeeping. The famous astronomical clock in Prague, completed in 1410, is a marvel of medieval engineering that still operates today. This complex mechanism displays not only the time but also the positions of the sun and moon, the phases of the moon, the zodiac signs, and the positions of planets. It represents the culmination of medieval understanding of mechanics, astronomy, and mathematics. Medieval timekeeping was inherently social and community-oriented rather than individual and private. Time was something shared by communities rather than owned by individuals. This social approach to time created stronger community bonds and reduced the individual stress and anxiety that characterizes modern time management. The accuracy of medieval timekeeping systems was different from modern precision, but often more practical for daily life. Medieval people could predict seasonal changes, plan agricultural activities, and coordinate community events with remarkable reliability using their natural timekeeping methods. Medieval farmers didn't need clocks to know when to plant crops or harvest grain. They read natural signs that were more reliable than any artificial timepiece. They understood weather patterns, plant cycles, and animal behaviors that provided accurate timing for agricultural activities. This natural time sense often proved more practical than mechanical precision. The transition from medieval to modern timekeeping began with the increasing importance of coordinated trade and manufacturing that required more standardized time measurement. The Industrial Revolution demanded that workers arrive at specific times and work for exact durations, creating the time-dominated culture we live in today. Modern research into circadian rhythms and seasonal affective disorders has validated many medieval approaches to time and scheduling. Medieval people intuitively understood that human energy and mood vary with seasons and times of day, and they structured their activities accordingly rather than fighting against these natural rhythms. The growing popularity of slow living movements and circadian lighting represents a return to medieval principles of timekeeping that prioritize natural rhythms over artificial schedules. People who adopt these approaches often report reduced stress, better sleep, and improved overall wellness. Medieval timekeeping teaches us that there are different ways to think about time, and that our modern obsession with minute-by-minute precision might not be the healthiest or most effective approach to organizing our lives. Medieval people achieved remarkable coordination and productivity using flexible, natural approaches to time that adapted to changing conditions rather than rigid adherence to artificial schedules. Consider your own relationship with time. How often do you feel stressed by schedules and deadlines? What would change if you organized more of your life around natural rhythms rather than arbitrary clock time? How might a more medieval approach to time improve your quality of life? The lesson from medieval timekeeping isn't that we should abandon clocks and return to sundials, but that we might benefit from remembering that time is meant to serve human needs rather than dominate them. Medieval people used time as a tool for coordination and planning rather than as a master that controlled every moment of their existence. Medieval timekeeping reminds us that the most sophisticated technologies aren't always the most complex ones, and that sometimes the wisest approach is to work with natural systems rather than trying to impose artificial ones. Their beautiful, accurate, and practical timekeeping methods achieved everything they needed while maintaining harmony with the natural world. While medieval communities were mastering the art of living in harmony with natural time, they were also developing agricultural tools and techniques that were so effective they could feed entire civilizations, innovations that literally shaped the course of human history and created the foundation for everything we call modern society. There's one medieval innovation that brought down more kingdoms than any army, toppled more dynasties than any war, and shifted the balance of global power more dramatically than any weapon ever forged. This wasn't a sword or siege engine, it was a farming tool that revolutionized agriculture so completely that it changed the course of human civilization. The heavy plough didn't just turn soil, it turned peasants into powerhouses and transformed Europe from a collection of struggling tribes into the dominant force that would shape the modern world. Here's what will blow your mind. This simple agricultural tool was more strategically important than any military technology, more economically powerful than any trade network, and more politically significant than any royal dynasty. The heavy plough literally built the foundation that allowed medieval Europe to support larger populations, develop complex societies, and eventually dominate global exploration and colonization. The story of the heavy plough is really the story of how technology can completely reshape civilization and why agricultural innovation has always been more important than military conquest in determining which societies rise and which ones fall. Before the heavy plough, European agriculture was limited by the light scratch ploughs inherited from Roman times. These simple tools could only work the light, dry soils of the Mediterranean region. When Germanic tribes moved into the heavy, clay-rich soils of northern Europe, their traditional farming methods simply didn't work. The land that would eventually become the agricultural heartland of Europe remained largely uncultivated because existing tools couldn't handle it. The heavy plough changed everything. This revolutionary tool featured a sharp coulter that cut through tough soil, a heavy ploughshare that sliced deep furrows, and a moldboard that turned the soil over completely. For the first time in human history, farmers could effectively cultivate the dense, nutrient-rich soils that covered much of northern Europe. Archaeological evidence shows that the introduction of the heavy plough led to immediate and dramatic increases in agricultural productivity. Excavations at medieval village sites reveal that settlements grew rapidly in size and complexity once heavy ploughs became available. Population estimates suggest that some regions experienced agricultural output increases of 300–400% within a few generations of adopting the new technology. The heavy plough required more draft power than traditional ploughs, leading to the development of larger, stronger ox teams and eventually the use of horses in agriculture. This created a feedback loop of agricultural improvement. Better ploughs led to higher crop yields, which could support more animals, which enabled even more effective ploughing. The introduction of the horse collar and horseshoe during the medieval period multiplied the effectiveness of the heavy plough even further. Horses could work faster and longer than oxen, and the improved harness systems allowed them to pull heavier loads without injury. Medieval farmers who combined heavy ploughs with horse teams could cultivate much larger areas than ever before possible. The three-field system that developed alongside heavy plough technology represented one of the most sophisticated agricultural management systems in human history. Instead of leaving half their land fallow each year as previous systems required, medieval farmers could keep 2/3 of their land in production. This represented a 33% increase in agricultural efficiency that supported rapid population growth and economic development. Medieval agricultural innovations weren't just about tools, they represented systematic approaches to land management that maximized productivity while maintaining soil health. The three-field rotation system alternated between grain crops, legumes, and fallow periods in ways that naturally maintained soil fertility without the chemical fertilizers that modern agriculture depends on. The economic impact of heavy plough agriculture was revolutionary. Surplus food production freed significant portions of the population from agricultural work, enabling the development of specialized crafts, trade, and urban centers. The cities that became the foundation of medieval European power, Paris, London, Cologne, and Milan, all developed in regions where heavy plough agriculture could support dense populations. Medieval agricultural surpluses also enabled the massive construction projects that defined the era. The great cathedrals, castles, and monasteries of medieval Europe were only possible because heavy plough agriculture produced enough of food to support the armies of workers required for such undertakings. Without this agricultural foundation, the architectural achievements we associate with medieval civilization could never have been built. The military implications of agricultural innovation were just as significant as the economic ones. Well-fed populations could field larger armies, support longer campaigns, and maintain more complex military systems. The knight-based cavalry that dominated medieval warfare was only possible because heavy plough agriculture produced enough surplus to support the horses, equipment, and training required for mounted combat. The social changes brought about by heavy plough agriculture reshaped European society in fundamental ways. The manorial system that characterized medieval social organization developed partly as a response to the labor requirements and management challenges of heavy plough farming. The feudal relationships between lords and peasants were built around the need to organize and coordinate the complex agricultural systems that heavy ploughs made possible. Different regions of Europe adopted heavy plough technology at different rates, creating economic and political advantages that persisted for centuries. Areas that quickly embraced the new agricultural methods gained population, wealth, and military power that allowed them to dominate regions that were slower to adopt improvements. The spread of heavy plough technology also facilitated European expansion into previously uncultivable regions. As populations grew and agricultural techniques improved, European communities could establish successful settlements in areas that had previously been too challenging to farm effectively. This internal colonization laid the groundwork for the later overseas expansion that brought European influence to every continent. Medieval agricultural innovations influenced global power balances in ways that military campaigns alone could never achieve. Regions with effective heavy plough agriculture could support larger populations, develop more complex economies, and maintain stronger military forces than areas that relied on less productive farming methods. The environmental impact of medieval agricultural innovations was complex and long-lasting. Heavy plough agriculture enabled much more intensive land use, supporting higher population densities but also requiring extensive deforestation and landscape modification. The agricultural systems established during the medieval period shaped European landscapes in ways that remain visible today. Medieval farming communities developed sophisticated knowledge systems for managing heavy plough agriculture that represented centuries of accumulated experience and experimentation. This traditional ecological knowledge included understanding of soil types, weather patterns, crop rotations, and animal husbandry that enabled sustainable high-productivity agriculture without external inputs. The decline of traditional heavy plough agriculture began with industrialization and the development of mechanized farming, but many of the principles established during the medieval period continue to influence modern agricultural practices. Contemporary sustainable agriculture movements are rediscovering medieval techniques for maintaining soil health and managing complex agricultural systems. Modern agricultural historians recognize that the medieval agricultural revolution was just as significant for human civilization as the later Industrial Revolution. The population growth, economic development, and social complexity that heavy plough agriculture enabled created the foundation for all subsequent European achievements in science, technology, and global influence. The lesson from medieval agricultural innovation is that fundamental technological improvements can have cascading effects that reshape entire civilizations. The heavy plough didn't just make farming more efficient, it created the conditions that allowed European societies to develop the complex institutions, accumulated wealth, and demographic strength that would define global history for centuries. Think about the agricultural systems that support your own food supply. How many people understand the technologies and techniques that make modern food production possible? What would happen to our complex societies if agricultural productivity declined significantly? How dependent are we on agricultural innovations that most people take for granted? The medieval heavy plough reminds us that civilization depends fundamentally on our ability to produce food efficiently, and that agricultural innovations can be more important than any other technology in determining which societies thrive and which ones struggle. Medieval agricultural success created the surplus wealth that enabled other innovations, including the development of monetary systems that were so stable and effective they solved economic problems that still plague modern financial systems. Every time you check your bank account and see your purchasing power slowly eroding due to inflation, every time you hear about currency crises or economic instability, every time you wonder why your money seems worth less each year despite technological progress, you're experiencing problems that medieval people solved centuries ago using monetary systems that were more stable, more honest, and more sustainable than anything we have today. Medieval communities created money that maintained its value for hundreds of years, prevented the boom and bust cycles that devastate modern economies, and operated on principles that modern economists are desperately trying to rediscover as our current financial systems show increasing signs of instability. The medieval approach to money reveals fundamental truths about value, trust, and economic stability that our complex modern financial systems have somehow forgotten. Medieval money wasn't the primitive barter system that many people imagine. Instead, medieval communities developed sophisticated monetary systems that were often more stable and equitable than modern currencies. The key was that medieval money was built on real value and community trust rather than government decree and complex financial engineering. The tally stick system used throughout medieval Europe represents one of the most ingenious monetary innovations in human history. These weren't primitive IOUs, but sophisticated financial instruments that served as both money and accounting systems. A tally stick was a piece of wood with notches cut into it representing a specific debt or credit. The stick was then split lengthwise, with the creditor keeping one half, the stock, and the debtor keeping the other half, the foil. The genius of the tally stick system was that it was impossible to counterfeit because each stick had a unique grain pattern that could only be matched by its other half. When debts were settled, the two halves had to fit together perfectly, creating an unforgeable verification system that modern digital currencies are still trying to achieve. Tally sticks were used by the English Exchequer for over 700 years, from the 12th century until 1826. This represents one of the longest-running monetary systems in human history, far more stable than any modern currency. The Bank of England itself was originally chartered to deal in government securities that were backed by tally stick debts. Medieval guilds developed their own local currencies that solved problems modern economists struggle with today. Guild tokens and local currencies allowed communities to trade efficiently without depending on scarce precious metals or distant banking systems. These local monetary systems kept wealth circulating within communities rather than being extracted by distant financial centers. The medieval understanding of just price created pricing systems that prevented the speculation and price manipulation that plague modern markets. Medieval merchants were bound by guild regulations and community standards that ensured fair pricing based on actual costs and reasonable profits rather than whatever the market would bear. Medieval communities also developed sophisticated credit systems that enabled long-distance trade and large-scale projects without the predatory lending practices that characterize much of modern finance. Medieval credit was typically extended based on personal relationships and community standing, rather than complex financial calculations designed to maximize profits for lenders. The Champagne fairs of medieval France created international financial systems that handled currencies from across Europe and beyond. These fairs developed exchange rates, banking services, and commercial law that facilitated trade between dozens of different monetary systems. The financial innovations developed at these medieval trade fairs influenced banking practices for centuries. Medieval monasteries served as some of the most stable and ethical banking institutions in history. Monastic communities provided secure storage for valuables, facilitated long-distance transfers of funds, and offered loans at reasonable rates without the exploitative practices that often characterize secular banking. The Templars developed a banking network that spanned Europe and the Middle East, offering services that wouldn't be out of place in modern international banking. The stability of medieval monetary systems came partly from their connection to real economic value rather than abstract financial instruments. Medieval money was typically backed by actual goods, services, or precious metals that maintained their intrinsic worth, regardless of political or economic changes. Medieval communities understood something about money that modern economists have forgotten: that monetary systems work best when they serve the real economy, rather than becoming ends in themselves. Medieval money facilitated trade, enabled saving, and supported investment in productive activities rather than creating wealth through financial manipulation. The decline of medieval monetary systems began with the rise of centralized nation-states that wanted to control currency for political purposes. Kings and princes gradually replaced local and regional currencies with national systems that they could manipulate for military and political advantage, often at the expense of economic stability. The transition from medieval to modern monetary systems involved the loss of many stabilizing features that had made medieval money more reliable. Modern currencies lost their backing in real value, became subject to political manipulation, and developed the inflationary tendencies that medieval systems had avoided. Modern alternative currency movements are essentially attempts to recreate the stability and community focus that characterized medieval monetary systems. Local currencies, time banks, and various forms of community exchange systems all reflect recognition that centralized, profit-driven monetary systems may not be the best way to serve local economic needs. The environmental sustainability of medieval monetary systems offers lessons for modern financial reform. Medieval money didn't require the massive energy consumption, complex infrastructure, and environmental costs that characterize modern banking and payment systems. Medieval financial transactions were conducted with minimal environmental impact using renewable materials and human-scale institutions. Medieval monetary systems were also more democratic and participatory than modern finance. Community members understood how their money worked, participated in monetary decisions that affected them, and could hold financial institutions accountable through direct relationships rather than complex regulatory systems. The lesson from medieval monetary systems isn't necessarily that we should return to tally sticks and guild tokens, but that we might benefit from understanding the principles that made those systems stable and equitable. Medieval money worked because it was based on real value, community trust, and mutual benefit, rather than abstract theories and profit maximization. Modern financial crises often result from the same problems that medieval monetary systems were designed to prevent: speculation divorced from real value, concentration of financial power in distant institutions, and monetary policies that serve political rather than economic purposes. Think about your own relationship with money and financial systems. How much do you understand about how modern banking actually works? How much control do you have over the monetary policies that affect your daily life? What would change if money served your community's needs rather than distant financial institutions? Medieval monetary systems remind us that money is a human invention that should serve human needs, and that stable, equitable monetary systems are possible when they're designed with community welfare rather than private profit as their primary goal. The medieval approach to money was part of a larger understanding of how human communities could organize themselves to promote mutual prosperity rather than individual accumulation at the expense of others, principles that extended to every aspect of daily life. As we reach the end of our journey through medieval innovations, there's one final everyday object that medieval people used in ways that might completely change how you think about knowledge, wisdom, and our relationship with the natural world. In your pocket right now, you carry a device that can access virtually all human knowledge instantly. Yet medieval people possessed a single handheld instrument that could predict weather patterns months in advance, navigate across oceans with pinpoint accuracy, tell time more precisely than your smartphone, and reveal the movements of planets with mathematical precision that wouldn't be matched again for centuries. This wasn't magic, it was the astrolabe, and it represents something we've completely lost in our digital age: the ability to understand and predict our world using direct observation, mathematical reasoning, and accumulated wisdom, rather than depending on algorithms we don't understand and systems we can't control. The astrolabe was essentially medieval civilization's smartphone, computer, and GPS device, all rolled into one beautiful functional instrument that required no batteries, never needed updates, and could last for centuries with basic maintenance. Medieval astrolabes were marvels of precision engineering that combined advanced mathematics, astronomical observation, and practical craftsmanship in ways that modern instrument makers still find impressive. The most sophisticated astrolabes, created by master craftsmen in centres like Toledo, Cordoba, and Oxford, could perform calculations that required teams of mathematicians and multiple books to accomplish by other methods. A skilled medieval navigator could use an astrolabe to determine his exact location anywhere on Earth by taking a few simple measurements of star positions. This same instrument could predict the time of sunrise and sunset for any day of the year, calculate the date of Easter decades in advance, and determine the best times for planting crops based on astronomical cycles. Medieval physicians used astrolabes for medical diagnosis and treatment planning, based on the astrological principles that guided medieval medicine. While we now know that planetary positions don't directly influence human health, the systematic observation and record-keeping that astrolabes enabled actually contributed to important medical discoveries about seasonal patterns in disease and the importance of timing in treatment. The mathematical sophistication required to create and use astrolabes was extraordinary. Medieval instrument makers had to understand spherical geometry, trigonometry, and complex astronomical calculations to create instruments that could accurately model the movement of celestial bodies and translate those movements into practical information for daily life. Different types of astrolabes were designed for different purposes and geographic regions. Universal astrolabes could be used anywhere on Earth, while specialized instruments were optimized for specific latitudes or particular applications like navigation, surveying, or astronomical research. The variety and sophistication of medieval astrolabes demonstrates the advanced state of mathematical and technical knowledge in medieval civilization. Medieval universities used astrolabes for teaching astronomy, mathematics, and natural philosophy. Students learned to use these instruments not just as practical tools, but as ways of understanding the mathematical principles that govern the natural world. The astrolabe served as a bridge between theoretical knowledge and practical application that modern education often fails to provide. The decline of astrolabe use began with the development of more specialized instruments during the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. While these newer tools were often more accurate for specific purposes, they lacked the integrated, holistic approach that made astrolabes so valuable for understanding the connections between different aspects of natural phenomena. Modern GPS and smartphone navigation systems are undeniably more convenient and accurate than astrolabes, but they've also made us dependent on technologies we don't understand and systems that can fail or be manipulated without our knowledge. Medieval navigators who understood their astrolabes had knowledge and skills that couldn't be taken away or disabled by external forces. The astrolabe represents a fundamentally different approach to technology and knowledge than what dominates modern life. Medieval people valued tools that enhanced human capability and understanding, rather than replacing human judgment and skill. They preferred instruments that taught users about the natural world rather than hiding complexity behind simple interfaces. Contemporary makers and educators are rediscovering the value of astrolabe-type instruments for teaching mathematics, astronomy, and navigation. Modern astrolabes are used in educational programs that emphasize understanding principles rather than just getting correct answers, reflecting recognition that there's value in knowing how and why tools work rather than just how to use them. The astrolabe also embodied medieval values about the relationship between human knowledge and natural order. Medieval people saw their instruments as ways of participating in and understanding the cosmic harmony that they believed governed all existence. This gave their tools spiritual and philosophical significance that purely utilitarian, modern devices often lack. Medieval astrolabe makers were not just craftsmen but scholars and artists who created instruments that were beautiful as well as functional. The finest astrolabes were decorated with intricate engravings and artistic elements that reflected the maker's understanding that tools for exploring the cosmos should themselves be worthy of contemplation and admiration. The precision and durability of medieval astrolabes puts many modern instruments to shame. Well-made astrolabes from the 13th and 14th centuries still function perfectly today, while most modern electronic devices become obsolete or stop working within a few years. Medieval instrument makers created tools designed to last for generations and serve multiple users over centuries. The knowledge required to use an astrolabe effectively made its users more knowledgeable about astronomy, mathematics, and natural cycles than most modern people, despite having access to far less information. Medieval astrolabe users developed deep, intuitive understanding of cosmic patterns that connected them to natural rhythms in ways that modern life often disrupts. As we reflect on this journey through medieval innovations, a clear pattern emerges. Medieval people consistently created solutions that were simpler, more sustainable, more durable, and often more effective than the complex systems we've built to replace them. They understood principles about living well that our rush toward technological complexity has caused us to forget. Medieval people worked with natural systems rather than fighting against them. They created tools that enhanced human capability rather than replacing it. They valued knowledge that connected them to their environment and community, rather than isolating them from both. They built things to last rather than designing for obsolescence. From toilet hygiene to communication networks, from medicine to sleep, from wealth creation to timekeeping, medieval people approached life's challenges with wisdom that modern people are only beginning to rediscover. They proved that sophisticated solutions don't always require complex technology, and that the most advanced approaches are often the ones that work in harmony with human nature and natural systems. The medieval world wasn't perfect, and we shouldn't romanticize the hardships and limitations that people faced. But in their everyday objects and daily practices, medieval people demonstrated approaches to living that might help us solve problems that our modern solutions have created. Perhaps the most important lesson from medieval innovations is that progress isn't always about moving forward toward more complex solutions. Sometimes the most advanced choice is to remember wisdom that our ancestors discovered and apply those principles to contemporary challenges. The humble objects that medieval people used every day, their knives and candles, their looms and astrolabes, their simple but effective solutions to universal human needs, remind us that the best technology often doesn't look like technology at all. It looks like wisdom. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the everyday wonders of medieval life. I hope these stories have given you new perspectives on both the past and the present, and maybe inspired you to look at the simple objects in your own life with fresh appreciation for the human ingenuity and wisdom they represent. The world is full of fascinating stories waiting to be discovered, from every era and every culture. Each everyday object has secrets to reveal, lessons to teach, and connections to make between past and present. So keep wondering, keep questioning, and keep discovering the extraordinary in the ordinary. Until our next journey through the hidden stories of history, sleep well, and dream of the infinite wisdom that surrounds us every day if we just know how to look for it.